My mother banned me from Thanksgiving in a voicemail that lasted 41 seconds. I know it was 41 seconds because I have listened to it more times than I am proud of. She said, "Paige, until you apologize to your brother in front of this whole family, you are not welcome at my table." She said, "Family has rules." She said, "The turkey is at 2, and I truly hope you come to your senses before then." And then she hung up without saying goodbye, which, in my mother's language, is a slammed door. I stood in my kitchen and listened to it twice. Then I poured my coffee down the sink, opened my laptop, signed into an account with a name my family had never heard me say out loud, and I paused 4 payments scheduled for the 1st of December. 4 payments, 6 years, a little over $296,000. That is what I had quietly spent keeping my parents' entire life running: the house, the car, the insurance, the pension check my father thanked God for every single month. Not one member of my family knew a dollar of it was mine. They thought the money came from a settlement, a dealership, a scholarship committee, and the good Lord's timing. And the woman they had just banned from Thanksgiving was every one of those things, wearing 4 different envelopes. Here is what I need you to understand before we go one step further. I did not cut them off to watch them starve. I cut them off because of what I had seen in my brother's truck 3 weeks earlier, and because of what was about to happen to my parents' house if I kept the faucet running. But I would be lying if I told you my hands were steady while I clicked pause. 9 days later, my mother was standing in a lawyer's parking lot holding a letter she could not make sense of, and my father was sitting in his truck beside her, gripping the wheel, unable to look at her. Because my father was carrying a secret too. His was in a brown notebook, and his was worse than mine. Before I take you back to the beginning, I owe you 3 promises, so you know exactly what you are staying for tonight. First, you are going to hear the list. The green accordion folder where I kept 6 years of receipts, every payment, every date, every lie of kindness I ever told, and I am going to read you the real numbers, because this story does not work on vague amounts. Second, you are going to hear what my brother did 9 days before Thanksgiving, on my own front porch at 11 at night when the first envelope did not arrive. My porch camera caught every word of it. There is one sentence on that recording that I have never repeated to anyone, and tonight I am going to play it for you because it is the sentence that explains this entire family. And third, the notebook, my father's brown spiral notebook, the one he kept in his toolbox under a tray of drill bits for 6 years. When I finally read what he had been writing in it, I had to leave the room, and I am 31 years old, and I do not leave rooms. You will hear the last page word for word. If you have ever been the one your family calls when the money breaks but not when the family gathers, do one small thing for me before we start. Tap like, subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and who does the quiet math in your family. That is the only time I will ask. My name is Paige. I am 31 years old. I own a small accounting firm that cleans up money messes for restaurants, and for 6 years, I was my family's entire economy. They just thought I was the cold one. Stay with me. Every envelope in this story gets opened before we are done. To understand the voicemail, you have to understand the house it came from. So let me draw you my family the way I would draw a client's books, honestly, even where it is ugly. My father's name is Walt. He spent 34 years as a machinist at Brennan Machine and Tool, a plant 2 towns over that made parts for equipment you have used and never thought about. He is the kind of man who measures twice on everything: wood, money, words, especially words. My father can fit an entire apology into the way he hands you a cup of coffee, and an entire argument into the way he does not. My mother's name is Lorraine. She raised us, ran the church rummage sale like a Fortune 500 company, and kept a curio cabinet of porcelain figurines that we were not allowed to breathe near. My mother is not a monster, and this story will be fair to her, but I will tell you her weather system up front. Lorraine needs the world to look right more than she needs it to be right. If those 2 things ever wrestle, looking right wins, and it wins fast. And then there are the 2 of us. My brother Ryan is 3 years older. and he was the son in that house from the day he was born. Quarterback for exactly one season, which in our family is discussed like a decade. Salesman smile, the kind that makes you feel chosen. Ryan could sell a space heater in July, my mother used to say, glowing, and friends, hold on to that sentence because years later I would sit in a lawyer's office and think, yes, Mom, that is exactly what he can do. And me. I was the kid who liked numbers, which in some families gets you praised, and in mine got me a nickname. The calculator. Dad said it warm. Ryan said it funny. My mother said it the other way. Paige, don't be such a calculator. When I asked, at 11 years old, why Ryan got a car fund and I got a savings bond. I want to be fair here, the way I promised. I was not abused. I was budgeted. There was a line item in that family for everyone, and mine said, she'll be fine, she's got a head on her shoulders. And the terrible thing about being the fine one, as some of you know very well, is that fine is a room nobody ever checks on. So I got a job at 15 at the Pancake Barn, kept my tips in a shoebox with a rubber band ledger, put myself through state in accounting, passed my CPA exam at 24, and hung my own shingle at 26 after 2 years of watching a boss take credit for my spreadsheets. Hartley and Company, one employee, me. I found a niche fast, restaurants, because restaurant books are where money goes to lie, and I am good at making money tell the truth. By 29, I had 6 people working for me and a waiting list. My family knew none of the real numbers. They knew I did taxes. At Thanksgiving, my mother introduced me to her cousin as, this is Paige, she's still doing her little bookkeeping thing, and then she turned to Ryan and said, and, you know Ryan, he's in medical sales now, he's about to be regional director. He was not about to be regional director. He was about to be unemployed for the 3rd time in 5 years, but we did not know that yet either. That is the family map. Now let me tell you about the night the map caught fire, 6 years ago, 2 weeks before Christmas, because everything I did afterward grew out of that one night. I had come by my parents' house to drop off a gift early because I was working through the holidays. Nobody answered the bell, but Dad's truck was in the driveway, so I let myself in through the garage the way I had my whole life. And I heard my mother crying in the kitchen. Not movie crying. Real crying. The ugly, hiccuping kind. The kind she would rather have died than let a neighbor hear. And my father's voice, low and flat, saying, Lorraine, I will figure it out. I stood in the doorway between the garage and the laundry room, holding a gift bag with a candle in it, and I read the kitchen table in one look, because tables are just books lying flat. A stack of envelopes with the cellophane windows, a yellow one on top from the county, a letter with a bank's blue logo, unfolded, creased hard like it had been read 50 times, and my father's reading glasses sitting on top of the pile, upside down, like they had been thrown. Here is what had happened, and I pieced it together that night in the doorway and confirmed the rest later. Brennan Machine and Tool had been sold 2 years earlier in a bankruptcy shuffle to a private outfit that stripped it and closed it. My father was 57 when the plant shut. 34 years, and his pension came out of the wreckage restructured, which is a lawyer's word for cut to pieces. He had been promised $2,900 a month for life and was receiving $640. For 2 years, my parents had been quietly bleeding. The furnace had gone, then the roof, half a roof, the cheap patch kind. My mother had gone back to part-time at the fabric store at 60, telling everyone it was for fun, for the discount. Girls, you know how I am about my projects. And the letter with the blue logo was the second mortgage they had taken to cover the gap, and the yellow envelope from the county was property taxes, a year behind. They were maybe 8 months from losing the house we grew up in. I did what I do. I walked into that kitchen, sat down and said, "Show me everything." And my father, who had not raised his voice at me since I was a teenager, stood up so fast his chair barked on the linoleum, and he said, "No, absolutely not. I did not go to my daughter's shoebox when I was 30, and I am not going to my daughter now. Put it out of your head, Paige. This is not yours to fix." I said, "Dad, I do this for a living." He said, "And I mean this." He said it gently, which made it worse. He said, "Honey, this is the one thing I have left to do right, and you are not taking it from me." Then he picked up the envelopes, all of them, squared the stack like a deck of cards, and carried it out of the room, and my mother wiped her face, smiled like wet paint, and asked if I was staying for supper. That was the night I learned the size of my father's pride and friends. I want to say something about that pride before this story makes you angry at it. A man like my father was built by promises that other men broke. 34 years of showing up at 6 in the morning was supposed to buy him a porch and a pension. When that promise fell through, the only thing the world left him was the ability to say, "I don't take handouts." You can call that pride. On some nights, I call it the last brick of a house someone else demolished. Either way, I drove home that night knowing two things. One, my parents were going to lose everything. Two, my father would let it happen before he took a check with my name on it. So the check would have to have someone else's name on it. I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen island with a legal pad until 4 in the morning, and I designed the most important client engagement of my life, a client who could never find out she existed. And 2 days later, I called Nadia. Nadia Ose and I met in a study group at State, the only two women who stayed the whole 4 hours. She went into law, elder law, and estate work. The quiet kind of practice where you spend your days protecting old people from the world and, more often than anyone admits, from their own children. I bought her lunch and slid the legal pad across the table. She read it twice. Then she looked up at me and said, "You understand what you are describing is a plan to lie to your parents every month for the rest of their lives." I said, "Yes." She said, "And you understand they may never find out, which means they may never thank you, which means you are buying nothing here except their light staying on." I said, "That is the product I want." And Nadia, who bills at $450 an hour and cries at exactly one thing, other people's parents, closed the folder and said, "Okay." Then we build it clean. Here is what we built, and I am going to walk you through it the way I promised, with real numbers, because vague stories are how families like mine stay sick. We formed a little company called Meridian Benefit Services. Boring on purpose, a name like a hold music playlist. Meridian's only client was me, and its only job was to move my money into my parents' life through doors my father could walk through with his head up. Door number 1, the pension. Nadia drafted a letter on real letterhead from a real administrative firm we retained, announcing that a supplemental recovery fund had been established for former Brennan machine and tool employees affected by the restructuring, and that Walter Hartley's benefit had been recalculated. His new supplemental check, $2,340 a month, on top of his $640. Restored, almost to the promised dollar. There really had been lawsuits swirling around that bankruptcy, which is what made it swallowable. My father called the number on the letter twice, suspicious as a barn cat, and a very patient administrator named Carol, who was real and whose firm we paid to answer that line, confirmed everything and mailed him a benefits packet thick enough to stop a door. The first check arrived on the 3rd of the month. My mother told me later, not knowing who she was telling, that my father sat at the kitchen table with that check for a long time and then went out to the garage and ran the table saw for an hour, and there was nothing on the bench when he came back in. Some men cry in sawdust. Door number 2, the house. The second mortgage and the back taxes came to $61,000. Meridian bought out the second mortgage through a note purchase, which sounds complicated but just means I became the bank my parents owed. And then Meridian restructured Walt and Lorraine Hartley's loan to a payment of exactly $1 per month, citing a hardship program. My father mailed a check for $1 to a post office box in my name every month for 6 years, on time, every time. $72. I never cashed a single one. They are in the green folder, all of them, rubber banded, and we will come back to that folder because I promised you a list and you are going to get the whole thing. Door number 3, my mother's car. Her old Regal died the following spring. A very friendly man at the Buick dealership, whose fleet manager happened to owe me a favor and whose invoice happened to route through Meridian, explained to my mother that she had been selected for a customer loyalty program and that a 3-year-old lacrosse with low miles could be hers for $99 a month. My mother has told the loyalty program story at church so many times that other women have gone to that dealership and asked for it by name. There is no program, friends. There was only ever me. And Dr. Number 4, the grandchildren. Ryan's 2 kids, my niece Ava and my nephew Cole, were in a private elementary school Ryan could not afford on a good year, and by then I already suspected there were no good years. When the school sent its second past due notice, a merit scholarship materialized, the Meridian Family Educational Grant, covering $600 a month of tuition, awarded to both children for citizenship and promise. My sister-in-law Whitney cried at pickup when she got that letter, one of the moms told me years later. I want to be exact about what all this cost because the number matters to the story. The pension was $2,340 a month. The tuition was $600. The car, after the fake program discount, cost me about $180 a month under the table. Insurance top-ups, the furnace I had replaced during a supposed recall, the December dividend Meridian paid every year, which my parents believed was interest and which paid for every Christmas at that house, all in, it averaged out to $4,120 a month for 72 months. $296,640, I could afford it. I want to be honest about that. I was not eating ramen to do this. The firm was thriving and I lived simply and I would do it again. But affording the money was never the hard part. The hard part was Thanksgiving. The hard part was sitting at that table every year, eating a turkey my dividend bought, at a house my $1 mortgage was saving, watching my mother raise a glass of wine my money paid for, and listening to her say, "We are so blessed. The Lord has been so good to this family, and Ryan, honey, tell everyone about the new territory they gave you." And then that same mother turning to me with the gravy boat in her hand saying, "And Paige, still just you in that condo? You know, work isn't a family, sweetheart." The hard part was my father slipping me a folded 20 when I left, the way he did when I was in college, saying, "Get yourself something, kiddo," and me taking it because he needed me to take it, and driving home with a $20 bill on the passenger seat that had, in a way that would take a whiteboard to explain, been mine the entire time. I took a strange comfort in the arithmetic some nights. Other nights I sat in my car in their driveway a minute too long before going in, doing a different kind of math, the kind with no numbers in it, and it never balanced. Because here's the question I could not file away, and it is the question this whole story is really about, so I will say it plainly and once. I knew they would take my money as long as they did not know it was mine. What I did not know was whether they would ever have taken me. Now, I promised you this story escalates, and it does, so let me introduce you properly to my brother, because everything that breaks, breaks through Ryan. For the first couple of years of the Meridian era, things at my parents' house were almost sweet. The panic lines went out of my father's face. My mother repainted the porch and rejoined the choir, and Ryan and Whitney and the kids came for Sunday dinners, and from across the table my brother looked like the version of himself my mother advertised. But I audit for a living, friends, and the thing about auditing is that you stop being able to turn it off. You do not see people. You see statements, and you see the gaps between them. Gap number 1. Ryan drove a new truck every 18 months, always leased. Always explained with a company car story, but he once parked crooked enough that I saw the plate frame from a dealership 4 counties away, which is where you go when the close ones know your credit. Gap number 2. At Ava's birthday party, I watched my brother step out to the backyard to take a phone call, and through the sliding glass door, I watched a man I grew up with pace like a stranger, one hand on the back of his neck, and when he came back in, he was carrying the smile the way you carry something heavy. Gap number 3 was smaller, and it was the one that told me everything. We were at my parents' for the 4th of July, and Ryan's phone was face up on the picnic table for once, and it lit up, and I was not snooping, friends. It was 11 inches from my potato salad. It was a notification from a sportsbook app. It said, "Your bonus bet expires tonight." And my brother picked up that phone in one motion, the way you pick up something spilling, and he looked at me just for a half second. And in that half second, we had the only honest conversation we'd had in 10 years. Neither of us said a word. That fall, he came to my office. He had never once been to my office. He sat across my desk in his good jacket, complimented my little operation, and asked me for $9,000. A certification course, he said. Medical device sales, big money on the other side of it. He just needed the runway, and you know how it is, Paige. You're the one who gets it, you're the numbers one. It is a strange thing, friends, to be flattered with the same word you were bullied with. I wrote the check. Not because I believed the certification course existed, I did not, and it did not. I wrote it because I wanted to see what he would do with the lie, because a $9,000 loss was worth the diagnostic. You may judge me for that. I halfway judge myself. He was supposed to pay it back in 6 months. What he did instead was tell my mother at Easter in front of the whole table a story about how he had already paid me back early, with interest, because family debts weigh on him. That is just how he is built, Mom. And my mother put her hand over her heart and looked at me and said, "Isn't that something, Paige, you could learn from your brother's heart?" I looked at Ryan. He looked at me. And he smiled the space heater smile, and there was nothing in his eyes at all, no shame, no plea, just the flat calm of a man who has learned that the family scoreboard only counts what Mom sees. I said, "It sure is something." And I let it go, and I want to tell you why I let it go, because it is not because I am a saint. It is because 11 days earlier, the school had called about a lapsed lunch account, and Whitney had quietly picked up a weekend shift at the hospital where she does billing, and I had realized that every dollar I clawed back from Ryan would come out of Ava and Cole before it ever came out of him. That is the trap of a man like my brother, friends. He does not stand behind his own debts. He stands behind his children. So the calculator bit her tongue, adjusted the ledger, and reclassified $9,000 from loan to tuition for the school of finding out who my brother is. Expensive course. Worth every penny. I want to show you one more ordinary scene before everything breaks, because you need to feel what those years actually felt like from inside my chest, and because two small things happen in it that matter enormously later. It was the Christmas after the Easter lie. Meridian's December dividend had landed in my parents' account on the first $1,200, right on schedule, and my mother had done what she did with it every year, which was turn it into a Christmas that looked like the ones from before the plant closed. Real tree, rib roast, presents stacked in drifts. And after dinner, in front of everyone, my mother handed Ryan an envelope. She said, "From our dividend, a little something for you two and the kids, because I know how tight things get with the school and all." $800, I found out later, of my dividend, handed to my brother with ceremony while he did the humble face. And then she handed me my gift. It was a candle. A vanilla candle, friends, with a bow on it, and she smiled so warmly. She meant it warmly, I want to be fair. And she said, "I never know what to get you, honey. You don't really need anything. You don't really need anything." I have thought about that sentence for years, because she was right in a way, and she was also telling me, without knowing she was telling me, exactly what my seat at that family was. The people who need are loved with envelopes. The people who provide get a candle, because providing is treated like weather, like something the sky does. And nobody writes a thank you note to the sky. I said it was lovely. I meant to say it normally, and I believe I did. And then I went out to the garage to breathe, because the garage has been my breathing room since I was a kid, and my father was out there fussing with the wood stove. And this is the part I need you to watch closely. The garage looked wrong. I could not name it at first, the way you cannot name a missing tooth in someone else's smile. And then I named it. The Bridgeport was gone. The big vertical mill, friends, the machine my father had bought at a plant auction the year I was born and restored bolt by bolt, the one he called the other woman when my mother could hear him. There was a clean rectangle of bare concrete where 1,100 pounds of iron had stood my entire life. I said, "Dad, where's the Bridgeport?" And my father did not look up from the stove, and he said, "Downsizing. No room in here, and my knees don't love the standing anymore. Got a fair price." And I stood there holding my candle, and something small and cold turned over in me, because my father does not sell iron. My father buries iron with full honors, but it was Christmas, and the roast was warm, and I let it go. One more detail. On the shelf above his bench, where his father's Hamilton pocket watch had sat in a little glass dome for 30 years, wound every Sunday, there was a socket set. I noticed it. I filed it under the same drawer as the mill, some quiet, sensible 60-year-old man's tidying, and I went back inside to the warm room and the wrapping paper, and I am telling you now, friends, I filed it wrong. Remember the empty concrete. Remember the missing watch. They are not sad little details. They are the two most important clues in this entire story, and I walked right past both of them holding a vanilla candle, because 2 years later, the stakes stopped being $9,000. It was October, 3 weeks before the voicemail, and my parents were hosting my father's 63rd birthday dinner. Pot roast, the good tablecloth, my mother's porcelain out from behind glass. Warm night, honestly. One of the last warm nights, and I try to remember it kindly. Dad told a story about a foreman from the old plant that made even me laugh, and my mother touched his shoulder when she refilled his coffee, and for a minute the whole thing looked like the postcard she worked so hard to keep printed. Then, between dinner and cake, Ryan stood up and dinged his glass with a fork. Big announcement. He and a partner were buying into a franchise, a sports bar concept out of Texas. Absolute rocket ship. The numbers were unbelievable. That part was true. The numbers were unbelievable. I know because he passed around a folder. Friends, an actual glossy folder. And while my mother was gasping at the artist's rendering of a neon sign, I did what I do to every projection sheet that has ever been put in front of me. I read the assumptions. Year 1 revenue assumed the bar would outperform the chain's national average by 40%. The franchise fee was $180,000, and on the last page, in the financing section, in font a size smaller than everything else, the plan listed collateral. And the collateral was a home equity line of credit on a house. And my brother does not own a house. He rents, which I knew, and my parents had conveniently never quite absorbed. There was exactly one house in that room. The one we were sitting in, the one I had spent $61,000 and 6 years quietly pulling back from the edge of a cliff. My brother was standing in it, in his good jacket, holding cake, pitching our parents on strapping it to a sports bar. And my father, my careful measure twice father, was nodding slowly and saying, "Well, I'd have to look at the numbers, son, but if it's as solid as you say, maybe the house could finally do some work for this family." Because, friends, and here is the knife of it, thanks to me, my father believed the house was safe. Thanks to me, he believed the world had gotten fair again, that pensions come back, that dealerships reward loyalty, that scholarships find deserving grandchildren, that a man's luck can turn. I had spent 6 years building him a warm room, and my brother was about to sell the walls. I set down my fork. And I want you to know I tried to do it quietly. I said, "Ryan, can I ask a couple of questions just because it's a big number?" He said, "Of course, fire away," and his jaw did a small thing, his smile did not. I said, "Does the franchise agreement have a personal guarantee?" He said, "Standard stuff, everybody signs those." I said, "Okay." Second question, what happened to the Silverado? Silence. See, my brother had driven up in Whitney's Kia, and the truck he loved more than any object on earth had not been in their driveway since August, and pieces click for me whether I want them to or not. That is the whole curse of me. He said, "We're simplifying. One-car family. Better for the environment?" And he laughed, and nobody else did. And I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, and I asked the third question, the one there was no way back from. I said, "Ryan, before Dad signs anything against this house, tell him what's on your sportsbook account. Tell him what the bonus bets are and the parlays and where your signing bonus went in March. Tell him why the truck is gone." The table went so quiet I could hear the porcelain hum. Whitney was looking at her plate, And friends, I will never forget this detail. She was nodding. A millimeter, nodding. And Ryan stood all the way up, and the space heater switched to a different setting, one I had only ever seen through a sliding glass door. And he said, "Are you kidding me? Are you actually at Dad's birthday doing this? You sit there with your spreadsheets and your empty condo and you cannot stand. You have never been able to stand that this family is happy. You want to talk about money, Paige? You charge strangers to count theirs because nobody ever asked you to be part of anything." And my mother stood up next to him. Next to him, friends, and she said, "That is enough. Paige Ellen Hartley, you do not come into this house and call your brother a gambler over a birthday cake." I said, "Mom, I am not calling him anything. I am asking him to answer." She said, "He doesn't have to answer garbage." And my father? My father sat there with his coffee going cold, looking at the glossy folder, and then at me, and then at nothing, doing some arithmetic of his own behind his eyes, and he said, quietly, "Everybody sit down, it's my birthday." And that was all he said. And the terrible truth, friends, is that a part of me broke a little more at his silence than at her shouting. And if you have a parent like that, the peacekeeping kind, you know that specific fracture, and you know it does not show up on any x-ray. I did not stay for cake. Whitney walked me to my car. She stood there in the driveway with her arms crossed against the cold, and she said one sentence, very fast, very low, like passing a note in class. She said, "The truck went in August. The rent is paid through October, and that's it. And Paige, he owes people who text him at 3 in the morning." Then she went back inside. Hold on to Whitney, friends. Everyone in this story underestimated Whitney, including me, and she is owed her moment, and she gets it. For 2 weeks after the birthday, the family phone tree lit up, and none of the calls were to me. I got the summaries secondhand from an aunt who cannot help herself. The official story, authored by my mother, edited by Ryan, was this. Paige had a jealous meltdown at Dad's birthday and accused her brother of being a degenerate gambler because she cannot stand his happiness, and until she apologizes to him in person in front of the family, she is not welcome at family events. The apology was the ticket, friends, not the truth of what I said. Nobody in 2 weeks of phone calls appears to have asked whether what I said was true. The offense was that I had said it at the table, in front of the porcelain. Looking right had wrestled being right, and looking right had won by knockout, the way it always won in that house. And then, on the second Sunday of November, at 9:40 in the morning, while I was standing in my kitchen in my socks, my phone buzzed. 41 seconds. "You are not welcome at my table. Family has rules. The turkey is at 2. So now you are caught up to the woman at the laptop. And I want to walk you through what I actually did that morning, slowly. Because the internet loves a revenge montage and real life is not one." I did not cackle and slam a big red button. I sat at my kitchen island for a long time with the account open and the cursor blinking, because pausing Meridian did not punish Ryan. Ryan had never gotten a dime from Meridian directly. Pausing Meridian turned off my parents' heat, effectively, eventually, and I knew it. And I am not going to pretend to you that I only did it for their protection, all clean, all strategy. There was a rage in me that morning, friends, an old, patient, filed and labeled rage. 6 years of gravy boats and little bookkeeping thing, and you could learn from your brother's heart. And when I clicked pause on the first payment, I will tell you the truth. It felt like exhaling for about 4 seconds. Then it felt like dropping a glass and watching it fall. But here is the strategy part, because there was one, and it matters. The birthday folder told me Ryan needed collateral, and the only collateral in the family was the house. And the house only looked like collateral because of me. As long as the pension flowed and the mortgage stayed at $1, my parents would keep believing they were secure enough to be generous, and my mother would keep believing Ryan was lucky, and some January morning I would find out they had signed a guarantee at a kitchen table I was banned from. I could not stop Ryan with an argument. I had tried that at the birthday and been banned for it. So I would stop him with gravity. Turn off the artificial weather, let the real climate back into that house, and let my parents see, while there was still time to see it, exactly what the world looked like without me in the walls. And there was one more reason, the coldest one, the one I only admitted to Nadia. If everything fell apart in November, the fall would be small. Bounced budget, scary letters, a terrible Christmas. If it fell apart in April after a personal guarantee on a franchise, the fall would be the house and everything left of my parents' life. Sometimes the kindest thing an accountant can tell you is, take the loss now, while it is survivable. So I called Nadia, and we did it properly, because even mercy needs paperwork. Meridian issued its letters that week. To my father, the Supplemental Recovery Fund regretted to inform beneficiaries that payments were suspended pending an administrative review, timeline uncertain. To the school, the family grant was under review for renewal. The dealership was told the loyalty subsidy would lapse at the end of the term. The mortgage was left exactly as it was, $1 a month. I want that on the record, friends. I never once touched the roof over their heads. The rest of it, the current, the comfort, the invisible $4,000 a month that made their life make sense, I shut off like a breaker, and then I sat back in the terrible quiet of my condo and waited to find out what my family was when the power went out. The first 3 days, nothing. On the 4th day, my phone rang, and it was my father, and my heart did a thing, and I let it ring twice before I answered, and I said, "Hi, Dad," and he said, "Hey, kiddo," and then he was quiet for a second, and he said, "Listen, I am sure your mother's message came out harder than she meant it. You know how she gets in November? I am not calling about that." I said, "Okay." He said, "I got a letter about the pension, some review, probably nothing. Paperwork people love their reviews, but you know numbers, so I figured I'd ask. Does suspended pending review mean anything I should worry about?" Friends, I was standing at my window looking at the parking lot, and I want you to understand what was being asked of me in that moment. My father, on the phone, with worry in his voice that he was working very hard to iron flat, asking his daughter, the accountant, whether he should be afraid of a letter that his daughter, the ghost, had written. There is a version of this story where I broke right there and told him everything, and some nights I think that version was the better one. It is not the version that happened. What happened is that I said, "It can mean a lot of things, Dad. Sometimes funds restructure. I would plan tight for a few months just in case." And he laughed one dry note and said, "Tight I know how to do," and then, before he hung up, he said something that I did not understand until much later, and when I did understand it, it took my breath. He said, "Well, it was good while it ran, wasn't it? Not, I hope they fix it. Not, what do I do if it stops? It was good while it ran." Past tense, friends, and calm, like a man closing a book he had always known was borrowed from the library. I stood there after the call looking at my phone, with the first cold thread of a question moving through me. What did he know? File that thread, friends. Do not lose it. It is the thread this whole story hangs from, and we are not ready to pull it yet. Because first, the envelope did not come, and my brother found out. The December pension check was due on the 3rd. On the 1st, the school grant renewal was due and did not renew. And on the night of the 22nd of November, 9 days before any of that, 11 at night, my porch light clicked on by itself, and my doorbell camera sent my phone a notification, and I looked at the screen, and my brother was standing on my porch. I had not spoken one word to him since the birthday. I did not open the door. I am going to say that plainly and let it sit because people ask me, even now, "Why didn't you open the door, Paige? He's your brother." It was 11 at night, and the man Whitney described gets texts at 3 in the morning, and the man on my camera was not standing like my brother. He was standing like the stranger through the sliding glass door. So I sat on my stairs in the dark, 10 feet from him, and I talked to my own porch through an app. I said, "It's late, Ryan." And my brother leaned into the camera so his face went wide and warped on my screen, and he smiled and he said, "There she is, the little producer." I said, "What do you want?" And for the next 4 minutes, friends, my brother spoke to my doorbell, and my doorbell recorded him, time-stamped, in high definition. And what he said is the reason this story ends the way it ends, so I am going to give it to you almost whole. He said, "You think I don't know?" He said, "Meridian. cute name. You know what I do when a scholarship shows up for my kids out of nowhere page. I say thank you like everybody else. But you know what Whitney does because Whitney does billing for a living. She reads the fine print, and the grant letters come from the same P.O. box as Dad's pension fund. And 2 years ago, I got curious, and it costs $11 to pull a business filing in this state. $11, Paige. Your big secret cost, $11. Registered agent, Nadia Osei. Your little study buddy. I have known for 2 years. I sat on my stairs in the dark, friends, and the floor of 6 years dropped out from under me all at once. He knew. He had sat across from me at Easter, at Christmas, at Dad's birthday, knowing. He had watched Mom toast the Lord's timing, knowing. He had asked Dad to put the house up, knowing whose money made the house look safe, and that is when the birthday dinner reassembled itself in my head in its true shape, and I went cold in a way I have never quite warmed back up from. He had not been pitching the franchise around me. He had been pitching it at me. The glossy folder, the collateral page in the small font, in front of the one person guaranteed to read it. It was a hostage note, friends, dressed as a birthday announcement. Fund me, or I take the house you secretly saved and feed it to the thing that eats me. And when I refused to play and asked my 3 questions instead, he had detonated the family on purpose. The meltdown story, the apology price, the ban, all of it. And my mother thought she was defending her son when she was reading his script. Isolate the money. Every con is the same con, friends. I know because I clean up after them for a living. On my porch, my brother put his hands in his pockets, rocked back on his heels like the neighborhood was his, and delivered the rest. He said, "So here's how it goes. That review letter gets fixed, and the December payments go out like always, and the dividend comes like always, and maybe a little extra this year. Call it a family growth round. And Thanksgiving, you show up, you do the apology, you keep the peace, because that is what you are for, Paige." And I must have made some sound because he leaned closer to the lens. And this is the sentence, friends. This is the one I told you about at the start, the one I have never repeated out loud until tonight. He said, "Or don't, and see what happens, because they will never pick you. You could buy them 100 houses. You are the ATM nobody likes, and I am their son, and the day you make them choose, you lose every time, forever. It's not even close." And then my brother straightened up, patted my doorbell twice like a good dog, and walked back to Whitney's Kia and drove away, and my porch light timed out, and I sat on my stairs in my dark house for a very long time. I want to be honest with you about that hour, friends, because this channel is not a highlight reel. I did not think, gotcha, it's all on camera. That came later. That night, in the dark, I thought, he's right. That is the thing about a sentence like that from a person who grew up in your house. It does not have to be true. It only has to be aimed, and Ryan had spent 31 years learning exactly where I keep the doubt, the same way I had spent 31 years learning exactly where the family kept its gaps. We were both trained by the same table, the ATM nobody likes. I looked around my condo at the clean counters and the one coffee cup drying on the rack, at a life I genuinely love and have never once been able to make my mother see, and for about an hour, my brother nearly won this entire story. And then, friends, at almost 1 a.m, my phone buzzed and it was a text, and it was from Whitney. 3 messages, fast, the passing note's voice again. He doesn't know I have his passcode. I saw what he sent you tonight before he deleted it, and I saw the app. And Paige, it's not thousands anymore. Check your email. And in my email, sent from a hospital billing address at 12:51 a.m., was a photograph of a screen, my brother's sportsbook account, the real one, behind the bonus bets and the parlays. The number at the top was negative. The number was $61,000, and underneath it, in the payment methods, pending verification, was a home equity line of credit application. Applicant, Walter R. Hartley. My father's name, friends. Already typed in. The application was dated 2 days after the birthday dinner, Whatever floor was left under me went too, and I stood up in my dark kitchen wide awake at 1 in the morning, and I heard my own voice say out loud, "To nobody," the truest sentence in this whole story. He was never going to ask Dad to sign. He was going to sign for him, and 61,000 friends. Do you remember where you have heard that exact number before in this story? The second mortgage and the back taxes 6 years ago. The hole I had quietly filled to save that house came to $61,000, and now a hole the exact same size had opened under it again, in the same dirt, and I do not believe in signs. I believe in ledgers, but I sat with that coincidence a long time, and it felt like the universe double underlining something. The next morning, I was in Nadia's office when it opened, with the porch video on my phone and Whitney's screenshot printed out, and Nadia looked at all of it for a long, lawyerly minute, and then she took her glasses off and said something I will never forget. She said, "Paige, 6 years ago, you hired me to protect your parents from bad luck. As of last night, that is no longer the engagement. The engagement now is protecting them from their own son, and the two do not use the same tools. Bad luck, you can pay off quietly. A predator, you have to name." I said, "Name how?" And she said, "Well, that's the thing. A forged application we can kill with one phone call to the lender, and we will, today, anonymously, and it will die quietly, and he will simply find the door locked and never know who locked it. But the rest of it, the lying, the ban, your mother, the whole architecture of him, that no lawyer can fix. That gets fixed at a table in front of the people he performs for, with receipts, or it never gets fixed at all." And she slid a legal pad across the desk to me, the same direction I once slid mine to her, and she said, "So, Thanksgiving is in 7 days. Tell me, counselor, what do you want to build?" We killed the loan application that afternoon. One call from Nadia to the lender's fraud line flagged as suspected unauthorized use of a non-applicant's identity, and the application went into a locked review that no charm was ever going to talk its way out of. Ryan never knew what hit it. He just watched the door he had been quietly building close in his face, pending verification, forever. And then I did something that surprised even Nadia. I said, "Now we wait." She said, "Wait." I said, "Thanksgiving is theirs this year. Let them have it exactly as ordered, with the empty chair and the apology that never came. I am not going to crash a holiday and hand my mother the story of Paige ruining Thanksgiving for the rest of her life. When this table gets turned, it gets turned on a plain gray weekday, with paper in daylight, my terrain, not theirs. The truth doesn't need a turkey, friends. It keeps." So Thanksgiving came, and I am not going to pretend it did not hurt, because it did, and I promised you honest. I spent it alone, on purpose, declining 3 kind invitations, because I did not want to sit at a stranger's table pretending. I wanted to sit with the real shape of the thing. I cooked myself 1 chicken thigh and mashed potatoes for one, and I set my little table for one, and it is possible I cried for about 90 seconds, somewhere between the potatoes and the pie that did not exist. Then I washed my 1 plate. And at 4:30 that afternoon, my aunt, the one who cannot help herself, sent me a photo from my mother's table without meaning anything cruel by it. That is just what she does. She documents. Everyone smiling, the porcelain out. My chair, my literal chair, the one I had sat in for 31 years of Thanksgivings, folded and leaned against the wall in the background. Not removed, displayed. And in the middle of the table, the good tablecloth, the candles, the turkey my dividend did not buy this year, which meant, I later learned, my mother had put the whole meal on a credit card while telling everyone the pension paperwork people were being difficult because looking right always wins, friends, always, right up until the moment it can't. I looked at that photo for a long time. And then I put my phone face down, and I opened the green accordion folder, and I did the thing I had been circling for 6 years and had never once let myself do. I added it up. All of it, out loud, alone, line by line, 6 years of Meridian, every pension deposit, every tuition payment, every $99 loyalty miracle, every December dividend, every furnace and windshield and copay and recall that never existed, and I wrote the final number on a piece of paper in black marker. $296,640. And underneath it, I wrote a second number, 72. The uncashed $1 checks. Friends, my father's proud, punctual, useless, magnificent $1 checks. And something about those two numbers sitting on top of each other on one page, the mountain and the pebble, both of them love, if we are honest, both of them love with its jaw set, undid me worse than the folded chair had. That was the night I stopped being angry, somewhere around 11, quietly, without deciding to. What replaced the anger was colder and calmer and much more useful. Clarity. They could keep the chair folded. But nobody was going to sign my parents' house over to a sports book. And nobody was ever again going to price my seat at that family in apologies I did not owe. Monday morning, I sent 4 text messages. To my mother, my father, Ryan, and Whitney. The same message, word for word. It said, family meeting, Saturday, 10 a.m. at Mom and Dad's about the pension review, the scholarship, and the house. I know what happened to all 3. This is not optional. I am bringing the paperwork. My mother replied within 4 minutes, and her message was so perfectly her that I laughed alone in my office. It said, if this is your way of apologizing, there are more gracious ways to do it, but fine. I will make coffee. Ryan did not reply at all. Whitney replied with one word, finally. And my father, friends? My father replied an hour later, long after I had stopped watching the phone. 5 words. I'll bring my notebook, kiddo. I read it 4 times. I did not know what it meant, and some part of me, the part that had been carrying a cold thread since it was good while it ran, was afraid that I did. Saturday morning. Gray, flat, spitting rain, a perfect plain weekday of a day even though it was a Saturday, the kind of light that does not flatter anybody's story. I got there at 9:52. Nadia came with me in her courtroom coat carrying nothing but one folder, because a lawyer with one folder frightens people more than a lawyer with a cart, she taught me that. My mother had made coffee and set out the good cups, because there was company coming, and the company was her own daughter and the ghost who paid for the cups. Ryan and Whitney arrived separately. Read that sentence again, friends. Separately. Whitney came in first, hugged me hard at the door, one fast squeeze, and took a seat at the far end of the table like a juror. Ryan came in 8 minutes late with takeout coffee he had bought for himself on the way, and that detail is my brother's entire biography. And he sat down across from me with the smile pre-installed and said, "Okay, drama queen, let's hear about the paperwork." And my father came in last, from the garage, not the hallway. He had been out there since before I arrived. He sat down at the head of the table without a word, and he set down, in front of him, squared to the table edge like a part in a jig, a brown spiral notebook, swollen the way notebooks get when they have lived a long time near work, and he put his reading glasses on top of it. And he looked at me, one steady look, no anger anywhere in it, and something in my chest started ringing like a struck pipe, and I did not know why. Hold on, friends. We are almost there. But you have waited this long, and you deserve to watch it land in order. My mother poured coffee and opened with the agenda she had written in her head. She said, first of all, I want to say that I am glad Paige has decided to move toward this family instead of away from it, and I think, before any paperwork, there is something she would like to say to her brother. The apology, friends, offered to me like a mint on a pillow one last time. I said, actually, Mom, I'll start with a question instead. And I looked at Ryan, and I asked the question I had flown past on the porch tape 40 times. I said, Ryan, how much do you currently owe total? Everyone, the app, the credit cards, the men who text at 3 a.m. Round number is fine. He laughed, looked at Mom, spread his hands, the full performance. He said, this again. And Whitney, from the far end of the table, in a voice I had never heard her use, flat and clear and done, said, answer her, or I will. The room stopped. Ryan's face did something complicated, and for the first time in this entire story, the smile buffered. He said, "Wit." She said, 61,000 as of last night. It goes up when he's stressed, and he's stressed right now, so more by dinner. My mother put down the coffee pot. She said, "That's not," and then she stopped because she had looked at Ryan's face on the way to defending it, and my mother is wrong about a great many things. Friends. But she has known that face since it was 3 days old, and whatever she saw on it, she sat down without finishing her sentence. And into that silence, I opened the green accordion folder. I said, "Mom, Dad." In 2019, this house was 8 months from foreclosure. Second mortgage, $61,000 with the back taxes. Dad's pension had been cut to $640 a month. And in January of 2020, a recovery fund letter arrived and the pension came back. My mother said, "Yes, thank God, the settlement." I said, "There was no settlement, Mom." And I started laying paper on the table, 1 page at a time, in date order, because order is mercy when you are demolishing somebody's sky. The Meridian Formation documents, my signature at the bottom, the letter to Dad, the draft version, with Nadia's edits in the margin in red pen. 6 years of transfer records, the third of every month, $2,340. The note purchase on the second mortgage and the restructure to $1 a month. The tuition grants with Ava's and Cole's names, the dealership invoice routing for a certain lacrosse loyalty program, and the summary page, the one from Thanksgiving night, the number in black marker, $296,640. I said, "There is no fund, there is no program, there is no scholarship committee, and the Lord's timing, Mom, was a P.O. box in my name. It was me. It has been me the whole time. Nobody moved." My mother picked up the pension letter like it might change under her fingers and looked at the letterhead she had thanked God over, and her lips moved, reading, and I watched 6 years of her cosmology come apart on her face. The settlement, the loyalty program, the scholarship, the blessings, every lucky thing that had ever confirmed that her family was favored, all of it turning page by page into her banned daughter's money. She said quietly, almost to herself, "The Christmas dividend." I said, "Me." She said, "The furnace recall." I said, "Me, Mom." She looked up at me. And, friends, I want to report her first full sentence accurately because it tells you everything about how long a person's operating system takes to update. She said, "Why would you let me say those things at those dinners? Not, you saved the house. Not, we banned the person who was carrying us. Why would you let me embarrass myself?" Looking right, wrestling being right, one last time out of pure reflex, and I watched her hear her own sentence land on the table, and I watched her be ashamed of it, visibly, maybe the first unmanaged expression I had seen on my mother's face in a decade. And that is when Ryan made his move, because a con man can read a room faster than anyone at the table, and he knew the spotlight was coming for him next. He stood up, warm, wounded, pivoting into the skid. He said, "Okay, wow, Paige, honestly, that is incredible. That is, I mean it, that is heroic. And I think, Mom, what this shows is that this family has communication problems way bigger than one birthday argument. And honestly, the healthiest thing is a fresh start all around, clean slate, everybody. Clean slate." The oldest 3 syllables in the debtor's hymnal. I said, "Sit down, Ryan. There's one more exhibit," and I put my phone flat in the middle of the table next to the marker number, and I pressed play, and my brother's voice filled our mother's kitchen. There she is, the little producer. I watched him recognize it, friends. I watched the exact frame where the smile went out of service. The whole 4 minutes. $11 page. I have known for 2 years. The review letter gets fixed and the December payments go out like always. You show up, you do the apology, you keep the peace because that is what you are for. And then the sentence, "They will never pick you. You are the ATM nobody likes, and I am their son, and the day you make them choose, you lose, every time. Forever. It's not even close." I stopped the recording. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock my money had never needed to buy, the one thing in that room older than all of us, doing its dry little count above the stove. And I said, one more page, and I laid down Whitney's screenshot, the 61,000, and the loan application with our father's name typed into it, dated 2 days after the birthday. And I said, he wasn't going to ask you to sign, Dad. The lender's fraud department has it now. It's over. It has been over for 9 days. He just didn't know it yet. And I looked at my brother and I felt, of all the things I expected to feel, mostly tired. And I said, the ban, Ryan. The apology. Thanksgiving. You built all of it, and you let Mom hold it, so that if I ever talked, nobody would be listening. You isolated the money. It's the same con you'd run on a stranger, except you ran it on your mother, using her own love for you as the crowbar. And that is the part I want back. Not the money. You can't like me, fine, that's old news. But you made her the weapon, and she is going to have to live with that now. And so will you. My mother was looking at Ryan, just looking. And she said, in a voice I had never heard from her, small, unarmored, no committee anywhere in it, Ryan, tell me she doctored that recording. Look at me and tell me. And my brother, the son of that house, the boy who could sell a space heater in July, looked at our mother and his mouth opened, and friends, nothing came out. 34 years of charm, and the tank hit empty in front of the one customer who had never once been sold to because she had always volunteered. He sat down. He put his head in his hands, and from behind his hands, barely, he said the first true thing I had heard him say since we were kids. He said, I can't stop. I've tried to stop. I can't stop. And Whitney closed her eyes, and my mother put her hand over her mouth, and the clock counted. And honestly, friends, if the story of my brother ended right there, it would be a sad story with a clean shape. It does not end there, but before I tell you about consequences, I have to tell you what happened next at that table, because the biggest reveal of that morning was not mine. I told you my father came in from the garage and put a brown notebook on the table. Through all of it, the paper, the recording, the confession, my father had not said one word. He had not touched his coffee. He had sat at the head of the table with his hand resting flat on that notebook the way you rest your hand on a dog that might bolt, and when the room finally went still, he cleared his throat, the smallest sound, and every head turned. Because in our family, my father clearing his throat is a gavel. He looked at me, and he said, Paige, February of 2021. The pension had been coming about a year by then, and Ed Kowalski from the old plant called me, all excited, to ask how I got my recovery money so fast, because he'd called the settlement administrator, the real one, the court one, and they told him payouts were years off, if ever, and pennies on the dollar if anything. So I called Carol at that nice office on your letter, and Carol was very kind and answered everything and knew things about my service years that took me a minute to realize I had only ever told one person at one kitchen table. My father turned the notebook around and slid it across the table to me. He said, It's a machinist's habit, kiddo. When a number doesn't check, you don't announce it on the floor. You write it down and you measure again in the morning. I opened the notebook, friends, and I had to put my hand over my mouth. Page 1, dated February of 2021, in my father's block print, the print he writes part specs in, was a ledger. Every meridian deposit. Date, amount, running total, drawn in ruled columns with a steel edge, 5 years of them, the exact mirror of my green folder, kept in a toolbox 11 miles away by a man everyone at that table believed was fooled. He had figured it out in 14 months. He had said nothing for 5 years. And next to the money columns, there was a second column, narrower, in pencil, and the header of the second column said, Paid back. Friends, I am going to tell you what was in the paid back column, and I need you to hold on to something because this is the part of the story where I stopped being the narrator for a minute and became just a daughter standing in a kitchen. Sold Bridgeport Mill, $1,200. Sold the Atlas Lathe, $900. Sold Dad's Hamilton pocket watch, $640. The clean rectangle of concrete, friends. the socket set where the glass dome used to sit. I had walked past my father's entire confession 2 Christmases ago, holding a vanilla candle, and filed it under tidying. Machined and sold 42 vice handles, winter 1100. Kowalski's son's transmission, paid in cash, kept it. Line after line after line, 5 years of lines, my father's tools, his father's watch, his weekends, his hands, sold and machined and repaired and saved, and at the bottom of the last column, double underlined the way he taught me to underline totals when I was 7 years old doing pretend invoices on the garage floor. $61,200. The number, friends? The exact size of the hole I had filled 6 years ago, gathered back one vice handle at a time by a man who was never supposed to know the hole existed. He said, "There's a safe deposit box at First Federal. Your name has been on it since the spring of 21. The key is taped inside the back cover. I was going to give it to you when it matched your 61, and I got there in September, and then I couldn't figure out how to hand it to you without breaking, so." He stopped, squared the notebook to the table edge again from across the table, pure habit, and looked at his hands. And my father, who fits arguments into how he does not hand you coffee, said, "I let her send that voicemail, kiddo. I knew what the money was, and I knew what you were. And I sat in my chair in the den, and I let her ban the one person carrying this whole outfit, because keeping the peace felt like keeping the family. And that is the worst math I ever did in my life. I am not asking you to wave it off. I am telling you I know the size of it." And then he opened the back cover and peeled off the little brass key and set it in front of me, and he said the last page out loud instead of letting me find it. And here it is, friends, word for word, the thing I promised you at the start. He said, "I wrote this the night of my birthday, after you left." It says, "If you are reading this, kiddo, then I finally ran out of ways to not say it out loud. You have been the pension all along. Not the money. The thing a pension actually is. The thing a man counts on, that shows up on the 3rd of the month whether he deserves it or not. I am sorry we made you be it in secret. Nobody should have to be loved anonymously to be loved at all. Signed, your dad. Balance owed, one daughter, in full, plus interest." I did leave the room, friends. I told you at the beginning, I am 31 years old, and I do not leave rooms, but I left that one. And I stood in the hallway by the coat hooks, next to the pencil marks where he measured our heights every birthday until I was 14, and I cried the way my mother had cried at that same table 6 years earlier, the ugly kind, the kind you would rather die than let a neighbor hear. And I felt the floor creak behind me, and my father stood there a second, and then he put his hand on my head, clumsy, heavy, a machinist's hand, the way you gentle something in a jig, and he said, "Easy, kiddo, easy. It's just the truth. It only rings loud because the room was quiet so long. So, consequences. Because tears are not a settlement, friends, and this channel does not end stories on a hug while the books are still open. Here is what got signed, built, and enforced in the weeks after that Saturday, most of it around that same table, with Nadia presiding like a referee who has seen every foul. Ryan got 2 folders, not a choice between mercy and punishment, but both at once, which Nadia says is the only version that ever works. Folder 1, the mercy. The family would pay for a real treatment program. Intensive outpatient, gambling specific, and Whitney got breathing room. The kids' tuition restored immediately and routed so it never touched Ryan's hands. And none of us would involve the lender's fraud unit further, provided. Folder 2, the provided. A signed acknowledgement of the debt and the forged application, held in Nadia's safe, live forever. Restitution to Whitney's household budget, garnish style, off the top of every paycheck. Self-exclusion registered with the state on every book and app, which is a real thing, friends, and if someone in your family needs it, it exists. Look it up. And weekly meetings, verified, boring, unglamorous, forever, because I have learned there is no dramatic cure for what my brother has. There is only Tuesday, over and over. He signed. Head down, no speech, And honestly, the no speech was the most hopeful part because a Ryan without a performance is the only Ryan with a chance. It has not been a movie since. He relapsed once, month 4, a small one, caught fast, and the folders did their work, and treatment held, and the last I heard from Whitney, the count was up to 200 and some days, and she counts, because billing is her love language too. Whitney, by the way, friends, is the quiet hero of this story, and I want that on the record. 2 years she carried what she knew, protecting her kids in a marriage that was a casino with a nursery in it, and when the moment came, she chose the truth over the smile, twice, at midnight and at that table. The kids' school calls her, not him, about everything now. We have lunch, the two of us, every second Thursday. I never had a sister at that table, turns out I do. Meridian, we shut down. On purpose, in daylight. Nadia dissolved the company, and in its place, my parents and I did the unthinkable. We sat down together, all cards up, and built an actual budget, with my actual name on the actual transfers. A boring, visible, signed family support agreement, pension-sized, house-secured, no ghosts, no letterhead, no loyalty programs. The first visible transfer went out on the 3rd of the month. My father calls it deadpan, the page plan, and reports to me monthly like I am the board, down to the dollar, because being accountable to me out loud is, I think, his way of paying interest. The $1 checks stopped. He asked for the old 72 back, all of them, the uncashed ones. I thought he was going to burn them or frame them. He did neither. He built a shallow wooden box with a glass lid, machinist joints, corners like a jewelry case, and he arranged all 72 checks in there in date order, and he engraved a small brass plate for the lid, and the plate says, "Paid in full, both directions." It hangs in their hallway, friends, above the pencil marks with our heights. My mother has to walk past it every single day, and I will tell you what my mother did, because I promised this story would be fair to her, and because her chapter is the slowest one, which is how you know it is real. She did not transform in an afternoon. There was no weeping speech, no big cinematic redemption at the table, and for about 2 weeks after that Saturday, she went quiet in a way that scared my father more than shouting. And then she started doing things. She stood up in front of her church women's group, the same women who had heard the loyalty program story and the blessed pension story for 6 years, and she corrected the record. Out loud, named the truth, named me, said the words, "My daughter carried this family and I banned her from Thanksgiving." Marjorie Kessler told me about it in the grocery store with tears in her eyes, said you could have heard a pin drop in the fellowship hall. For my mother, friends, for the woman whose whole life was looking right, that was open heart surgery performed on herself, in public, without anesthesia. The apology itself came in November, a year almost to the day after the voicemail. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, my doorbell camera pinged and I looked at my phone, and my mother was standing on my porch on the exact boards where her son had explained what I was for, holding a casserole dish with foil over it and a card on top. I opened the door in person. She stood there very straight, chin up, eyes wrecked, and she said, "Your father informs me that I am banned from your Thanksgiving table until I apologize." His words. He has been waiting a year to use them, and he grinned like a boy when he finally got to. So, here I am. And then my mother, who does not do porches, did 41 seconds on mine, and I know it was 41 seconds because those things timestamp, and I have kept this one too, and I will not play you all of it, because some of it belongs to just us. But I will tell you the sentence in the middle. She said, "You were never the calculator, Paige. I was. I counted everything about you except what you were worth. I took the casserole, friends, and I stepped back and I held the door open, and that was the whole ceremony, a doorway, a dish, 2 women who do their crying in kitchens, and my mother crossed my threshold for the first time in her life as a guest instead of an inspector and helped me set my table. Thanksgiving was at my condo that year. My table seats 6, and we put 8 around it. Dad carved badly, gloriously, dropping exactly 1 drumstick, which Ava caught, which is now legend. Whitney brought pie. Ryan came, sober, 211 days that day, quiet, helpful, present in a way that a performing man never is, and he did the dishes without being asked, all of them, and when he handed me the last dry pot, he said, under the kitchen noise, "Day 211," and I said, "I know." Whitney texts me, and he almost smiled, a real small one, no space heater in it anywhere, and at 2 o'clock, when we sat down, my mother straightened her fork and looked around the table and started to say, "We are so blessed out of 40 years of habit." And she caught herself, and she looked at me, and she said, corrected, "We are so carried by people we didn't see. Somebody at this table taught me the difference. That is as close to a toast as we came, friends, and it was plenty. I will not pretend it is all mended. My mother and I still misfire, old reflexes on both sides, and there are silences with Ryan that may never fully fill, and I have accepted that some accounts stay open your whole life, accruing a little, paid down a little, never quite closed. That is not tragedy. That is just family, carried honestly instead of secretly. And honest carrying is so much lighter, friends. You would not believe the difference until you feel it. The green accordion folder is empty now. I shredded 6 years of secrets myself, 2 pages at a time, and kept the folder, and the only thing that lives in it today is a brown spiral notebook with a brass key taped inside the back cover, because the $61,000 is still sitting at First Federal, untouched. Dad and I finally agreed on what it is for. We went to First Federal together on a Tuesday in December, both of us in our good coats, like people going to court or church. The box was small and gray, and it slid out of the wall with a sound like a drawer of drill bits. Inside was the cash, banded the way tellers band it, and one other thing I did not expect: the glass dome. Empty, carefully wrapped in a shop towel. The dome that had covered his father's watch for 30 years. I said, "Dad, you kept the dome." And he said, "Well, the watch was for the debt. The dome is for whatever comes after the debt, and I hear they can put anything under glass these days." We retitled the account that afternoon, the whole $61,000 college money for Ava and Cole, in both our names, his column and mine, the 2 ledgers that found each other in the dark. First thing we ever signed together. The banker asked if we were partners. My father said, "She's the majority shareholder," and winked at me over his reading glasses, and I had to look very hard at the signature line for a minute. On the way out, he stopped at the counter and bought 2 lollipops from the little charity jar, one for him and one for me, like I was 7, and we ate them in the truck in the parking lot with the heater running, not saying much. And friends, of all the transactions in this story, and you have heard every one of them, that is the only one I would not sell back at any price. And here is the last thing I will tell you, the thing I would engrave on a little brass plate of my own, if my hands could do what his do. For 6 years I paid for everything, and it bought me a folded chair against a wall. Then the money stopped, and the truth stood up, and it turns out the truth was the only check in this whole story that could not bounce. Love that has to stay anonymous to be accepted is not yet love, friends. It is layaway. Insist on the real thing. Sit at tables where your name is on what you give and your chair is unfolded before you knock. And if the people you carry ever price your seat in apologies you do not owe, let the weather in. Not out of spite, out of respect, for them and for you, because nobody ever learned what a load-bearing wall was while it was quietly holding the roof. My chair is not against the wall anymore. It is at my own table at 2 o'clock with the leaf in. The turkey is at 2, friends. And everyone is welcome who comes through the door as themselves. That is the whole rule. It is the only rule my table has.